Today we're going to be talking about what happens to tax debt after death, as it can be a tricky subject to navigate. Let's start with personal debt, which will give a bit of context for tax debts later on. If you have personal debt when you pass away, the debt is passed on to your estate. This means any money that you have left behind will be used to pay off the debt first, and then the remaining money or assets will be split according to your wishes in your will or as stated in common law. It's important to note that paying back personal debts of the deceased is the responsibility of the executor of the will during probate, and they are not personally liable for paying the debts back to creditors just because they are family or a friend. Moving on to HMRC debt. If you owe money to HM Revenue and Customs when you pass away, outstanding tax debts are also paid back within your estate. For example, if you owe £2,000 in tax to HMRC when you die and leave £10,000 in savings behind, £2,000 will be paid to HMRC and the remaining £8,000 will be paid as per your wishes in your will. Because the value of an estate is reported to HMRC for inheritance tax purposes, dealing with a deceased person's income tax during probate is not as difficult as you might imagine. If you're unsure about any tax liability after death, you can contact HMRC for tax liability after death support. HMRC runs specialist helplines to help executives of wills make sure tax debts are paid back correctly. So, what happens if there's not enough money left behind to pay off the debt? If the amount of debt owed is more valuable than the amount of money and assets left behind by the deceased, their estate becomes known as an insolvent estate. Insolvent estates are tricky, and dealing with them is best done with professional help. HMRC and creditors will be repaid from what is available in priority order. Tax debt is one of the first to be paid back. Let's talk about council tax debt. If somebody dies with a council tax debt and they live alone, the debt will be paid back through their estate. However, if the deceased was living with somebody in their property during the time the debt accumulated, that person will also be responsible for paying back the debt because they benefited from the share in the property. The same person will be left to pay the future council tax bills if they are now the sole occupier of the property, but they can claim a reduction of 25%. So, tax debt isn't necessarily wiped when somebody passes away. If you're struggling with debts after the death of a loved one, then you might be best off talking to a debt charity. Charities like Step Change, Citizens Advice, Christians Against Poverty and others can give great advice tailored to your situation.